Hey, welcome everybody to the Tuesday night 12-step live video with Toni Shakes, right?
Yeah.
Welcome, Toni. Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
It's
Happy
lovely to
Women's
be
Day.
here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and to all the beautiful
All the
women
ladies.
watching.
Yeah. So guys, just before we start, I want to quickly run through the intro. We're broadcasting on 3 public channels: the MyRehab Helper Facebook profile, the ARC or the MyRehab Facebook page, and the Duty Diagnosed YouTube channel. Those are the public channels, so we'll be broadcasting on those channels for the first 15 to 20 minutes before we switch over exclusively to the MyRehab Cafe, which is a private and unsearchable Facebook group. We've got a number of members on that platform that generally engage and participate. If you're on that platform, please wait until, and you want a higher degree of anonymity or confidentiality, please wait until we switch over before jumping on. Otherwise, if you're on the public channels, I have posted the link in the comments, and you guys are welcome to hop on and participate or ask questions. If you want to post a comment, you can do that. The link is in the comments. If you can't see it, please refresh your feed. And yeah, with that, Toni, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. So being still the very beginning of this series of podcasts on the 12 steps, I thought it would be really lovely this evening if we jump into the first step. So last week I spoke about the frame and the structure of what a recovery format in terms of the 12 steps are about. And one of the pillars, we spoke of the 4 pillars, one of the pillars being step work. And what are these 12 steps that I'm speaking of? What are the steps that are spoken of at meetings? And I thought it would be really helpful just to begin with step 1. And so tonight we're just going to unpack a little bit around what is step 1 itself and unpacking the concepts, which is, so step 1, for those of you that are not familiar, and even if you are, we admitted that we were powerless and that over our addiction, and that our lives became unmanageable. And for me, what's really important with step 1, I do tell my clients and people who are curious around this, is that without step 1, there can really be no sustainable recovery, because step 1 really is the anchor to remember why I'm not using substances or behaving with that particular process addiction anymore. It's a constant reminder, a constant I guess it's an anchor point to why am I changing my behavior. It's very easy to forget, and denial pops up really quickly. So there's 2 parts. The first part being powerlessness. What does that mean? And the second part being unmanageability, and what would that look like? And Ryan, we can't really separate the 2, because when there's powerlessness in a person's life and they're unable to stop a particular behavior or using of a substance, there is going to be fallout. And so the unmanageability that the step speaks of is the fallout as a result of the powerlessness. And so they are very, very connected. So I mentioned last time those that were here and those that weren't. One of the most effective and simplest tool to use in understanding the 12 steps is the NA Green and Gold Step Working Guide. And so I really encourage those of you that are curious to read more and to understand the process of addiction, any addiction, to use that as a reference. So I've taken just a brief reading around powerlessness from this. And I just want to read out a couple of the concepts, which is, so as addicts, we react to the word powerless, which I understand, and an emotional response is really important to understand. So we react to the word powerless in a variety of ways. Some of us recognize that a more accurate description of our situation simply could not exist, and admitting our powerlessness with a sense of relief. Others recoil at the word, connecting it with weakness or believing it to indicate some kind of character deficiency. It's really important to see what kind of emotional response you are having to that concept. Understanding powerlessness and how admitting our own powerlessness is essential to our recovery will help us get over any negative feelings that we may have about the concept. We really understand what it means. We are powerless when the driving force in our life is beyond our control. Our addiction certainly qualifies as such an uncontrollable driving force. We cannot moderate or control our drug use or any other compulsive behaviors, even when they are causing us to lose the things that matter most to us. We cannot stop, even when to continue will surely result in irreparable physical damage. We find ourselves doing things that we would never do if it weren't for our addiction, things that make us shudder with shame when we think of them. We may even decide that we don't want to use, that we aren't going to use, and realize that we're simply unable to stop when the opportunity presents itself. We may have tried to abstain from drug use or other compulsive behaviors, perhaps with some success for a period of time without a program, only to find that our untreated addiction eventually takes us right back to where we were before. In order to work the first step, we need to prove our own individual powerlessness to ourselves on a deep level. And so that for me is a really wonderful opportunity to jump in a little bit further around powerlessness.
Sorry, I got a quick question. Sorry, I don't want to complicate things, but so AA, when Bill W and the lot wrote the Hi Sophia, welcome, thanks for tuning in. So yeah, when they sort of started, when they wrote out the steps, initially they made reference to the word alcohol. So we were powerless over alcohol. And that our lives have become unmanageable. And Narcotics Anonymous came along and swapped out the word alcohol for the word addiction. Okay.
Yes.
And Bill W referred to that as a 10 strike, meaning that it was like a really so he referred to it in the same way that he referred to the step 3, where they added the part of the God of our understanding. Okay, so. He thought of it as like a really cool way of drawing the attention to the behavioral sort of aspects of what they refer to as the disease, right? As opposed to placing the emphasis on the actual substance. Okay.
Yes. Sure.
So and I don't know if this is again, I don't want to overcomplicate it, but if the word addiction. Okay.
Yes.
Because that from an NA perspective kind of seems to encompass all kinds of behaviors that might deviate from the values that the steps embody. I don't know if that's an accurate description. Is that an accurate description, or how would you define addiction? Not in the clinical, technical sort of sense, but in the NA context.
So when you say that are you saying that it's watering it down by extending it to addictive behaviors? It's not being true to the simplest form that it speaks initially to alcohol specifically?
So I'm saying, yeah. So look, from the NA, geez, I don't want to again, but from the NA perspective, you kind of, so if we're powerless over alcohol, that's just straightforward. It's like if I have one, I'm going to have 10,000, right? Until whatever happens, until I end up in hospital or whatever the case, right? So it's very specific to alcohol. But NA swap that word out for addiction, and addiction doesn't necessarily place the emphasis on the substance.
On substances alone, sure, yes.
But then what is it placing the emphasis on?
So with addiction, NA was narcotics, so it would replace that, just say, with a particular drug. So there is, for me, there's the distinction. I understand what you're saying. So there's the substance, which is alcohol. There's a substance which could be cocaine or heroin or whichever other drug. It could even be prescription medication as a drug that we refer to. And in that regard, I guess in its simplest form and its purest form, it's talking about abstinence. So I'm powerless over alcohol. Don't drink alcohol. I'm not powerless. or I'm not going
Okay.
to lose control in that sense. Don't
So,
use drug, I'm not going to lose control. When it talks
yeah.
about a broader context of addictive behaviors, when you start speaking about process addictions, we could bring in gaming, gambling, sex, food, pornography,
Sessions, yeah.
work. I mean, there's some relationships in terms of codependency. It becomes a lot more murky water. It's not just simply gambling, could be abstinence.
Yeah.
However, relationships is not abstinence. Codependent, it's not as simple as we just don't interact with another person. Or with food, with eating disorders, it's not as simple as just abstain from eating. And then, so absolutely, there's a different energy around working with the addictive behaviors, which are process addictions, as opposed to substances where we strive for abstinence.
Well, you know,
I
from
don't know
an
if I'm answering you.
I don't, yeah, I think you are. So yes. So the word addiction is sort of like broadening the scope of substance
Yes.
and behaviors, right?
Beyond, yes.
Beyond, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, yes, I think so. So in a lot of ways, yeah, you have answered it. You know, NA talks about striving for recovery and not simply
Yes.
just abstinence, right?
Yes.
So the word recovery comes with its own sort of
Yeah.
references
Sure.
and you know, its own definition and
Absolutely.
you know, I'm a fan of definitions. I think definitions are important, right? But it's, you know, I think it's difficult because again, you know, someone might be an addict in the sense, like you said, that they're addicted to porn or gambling or whatever. And a different person might be addicted to, but so addiction in that context then is referring to the obsession of the mind,
The compulsion.
so it's referring to those elements.
Yes.
I just think that a lot of people expand that at their own sort of you know, discretion, and kind of like to include all sorts of other things, which I think,
or maybe Ryan, maybe it's also that, you know, not fully understanding what addiction means. Like, oh, I'm addicted to chocolate, or people, you know, people throw around the word also very freely. We could use it also with mental illness. Oh, you know, I'm so depressed, but they're just having a down day. They're not necessarily depressed. And so I think it is important to understand and to define what is, maybe that's a starting point even today, a little bit more around, well, what is addiction? What is loss of control? And what is different between somebody who's using and abusing substances or a particular behavior and somebody who's actually an addict and therefore needs to attend to it? Because that for me is always the issue, is not everyone that is watching porn regularly is an addict, and not everyone that is using cocaine regularly is an addict. And what defines that person? And therefore, to understand, for that individual to understand, well, it's not just because I'm stressed. It's actually the primary focus needs to be, I need to stop acting out on this behavior, which is actually causing a lot of those problems. It's not the other way around. And so for me, you know, to simplify the process around addictive behavior, and it speaks to, you know, what I've just been reading about, you know, when there are negative consequences in my life as a result of a behavior, but I'm unable to stop. I don't want to be doing this. And there's shame and guilt, and there's lots of very uncomfortable fallout as a result of these behaviors. And I'm not able to actually get them, I was like under control. I've attempted many things. I'm hiding it. I'm lying to my family. I'm doing a whole lot of things because of the shame. So people who are not addicted are not necessarily going to those lengths to cover it up and hide it, or necessarily even using it or behaving with those behaviors to cause those emotional responses.
Hi Chris, how you doing, man? Sorry, I see you popped on there. I'm gonna add you to the stream when you're ready. Feel free to participate. So the problem, see, now I lost my train of thought. Let me just think about. Oh yeah, okay. So the problem that I have with the word addiction, right? So if you enter into a treatment center and you're seen by a doctor, there's a physiological dependence, right? The doctor writes out a prescription. And the reason he writes out a prescription is so that he can give you medication, which is one of the reasons, so that you can safely detox from the substance, from a physiological standpoint. But it's also because he's diagnosing you, okay, with a substance use disorder, right? Okay.
Yes.
So being diagnosed with a substance use disorder, most certainly one could say, in most cases, generally speaking, that once you've been diagnosed with that substance use disorder by a medical professional, the word addict, which is a more of a colloquial sort of like term for substance use disorder, but again, that term encompasses a lot more things, right? But you know, the thing that the issue that I have with the word addict, okay, is so it's considered a lifelong illness, right?
Yeah.
It's considered lifelong, right? So abstinence is the answer to this, in the same way that not eating chocolates, you know, okay. So moderation isn't necessarily an option, okay? So a lot of people might have troubles with addiction, okay, and enter into a treatment center and sort of like, you know, hear words like powerlessness, so on and so forth. And you know, again, who decides whether a person is an addict? Yes, the doctor decides, you know, when he does the prescription, but the addict in the more colloquial sense, who decides that? And it's really the person
themselves.
And they base that on their subjective experience with the substances and behavior and all that, right? Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely. And for me, one of the most important parts of this process is absolutely, well, for me, it's guiding my clients to help them learn and understand, is there powerlessness? Maybe there isn't. Maybe it's just been, you know, use, abuse, dependence, and it hasn't moved over to addiction. Maybe there isn't addiction. And I'll tell my clients all the time, it's not for me to diagnose that or to determine that for them. It's, you know, each person has the ability to explore and to challenge their denial, because denial is a very tricky psychological barrier to work with. And we don't know that we're in denial. We have a perception, we understand ourselves. And so the more information we can gather, either through our own experience with a therapist, like myself, or in a facility like yours, or somewhere, the more we can get distance between our experience and where the lens we're viewing it, the greater chance there is that we can break through some of that denial. But when we're in something, we don't even know that we're in it. And so getting feedback from loved ones, collateral or whatever it is in a rehab environment, can be incredibly helpful to say, you know what, you think that you're getting on really well with your siblings, but let's find out what your siblings think, or your family. And so sometimes it can be very confronting. It's like, wow, I didn't realize, because families also, and this is where I think it becomes maybe broader in terms of what you're speaking of. The family, maybe, you know, they're codependent, they've got their own addictive behaviors around, you know, the people pleasing, the colluding and enabling that goes on, and they've never told the person, or they're in their own denial that it's not so bad, because that the addict hasn't actually revealed to the family what's really going on. So there's layers that need to be broken through. And step one for me of the 12-step program, and again, this is, you know, I'm here to share about this particular model, but it very much is, let's focus on loss of control. If there is no loss of control, hey, chances are you're not an addict, and this isn't actually something that you need to be addressing. I don't know many people who land up in rehab who aren't actually appropriately there.
No, listen, if someone knocks on our, well, we had this lady once. Sorry, Chris, how you doing, man?
Sorry, Ryan, good in yourself?
Yeah, good. So I'm going to bring you on in a minute. So we had this lady once who it was very strange. She drank a bottle of wine, a full bottle of wine over the course of every weekend, and she came knocking on our door, and she was like, "I've got a problem. Like, I need help." And the extent of her problem was that she was drinking a bottle of wine, you know, over the course of a weekend. And that, you know, you say that to somebody like myself or Chris, and he's like, "Oh man, you know, that's what we did."
Many years before.
Do you know what I mean? Well, you know, and so you know, but for her to start identifying as an addict is a little bit unreasonable, obviously. And her family did come along and say, "Listen, there's something else going on here. You know, it's not really that bad." And her, you know, so it was very much from the other way around, where normally the family comes around and says, like, "Listen, this guy's doing stuff, all sorts of things are falling." And this lady, so this was the other way around. They're like, "No, what is she doing in here? Like, she's not raging
Yeah,
alcoholic.
yeah,
You
sure.
know?
You know, I
Um,
think just to touch on that, what I have come across more in my private practice, I would say, than in the rehab environment, because I think rehab's also quite an extreme response to use and abuse and ultimately addiction, is that different people, that, you know, the catalyst or the rock bottom moment for person A can be very different for person B. And the threat of losing a job can be the rock bottom for person A. Being fired from multiple jobs, potentially losing, or even losing family, being kicked out, maybe, you know, still they continue to use. And so it's important also to allow the individual their own experience and to validate that for those people. And I'm not saying that that person you speak of was necessarily an addict, but everybody has their own point at which they recognize that this has gone beyond, I've lost control here. I cannot
Yeah.
stop. Maybe even she's recognizing dependence and
Mm.
fearful of the fact not being able to stop alone, and I need help. So it's a wonderful response to a situation, but it doesn't necessarily mean, when you say like raging addict, it doesn't necessarily mean, it's also like on a continuum. If she had continued to do that, she possibly drinking more frequently and greater volumes, potentially turning to other substances or behaviors. And what I do find, I would say mostly, you can, you know, correct me if you feel that I'm incorrect in my assessment, is that of the 12 steps, only step 1 speaks of the substance. The rest of the steps is about, well, it's all about recovery, but recovery is about my relationship with myself, and then my relationship with a higher power, a relationship with my peers, a relationship with the community that I live in, and extends beyond. The focus is very little actually on the substance. The primary focus is on the damage that that substance has caused in my life. How am I going to create awareness to keep me accountable to that? And then it's about behavior change. And so it's, you know, if the focus or the primary objective really was just always about the alcohol, my feeling is that alcohol would be would be named throughout all 12 steps. But it's really about the first step of becoming abstinent, stop using, recognize why, and now we can begin this journey of unpacking other things, which is what you mentioned, is that it is about a journey of recovery, not just abstinence. And it's important for those that are listening and for all of us just to reflect on that concept. It's not just about abstinence and not really learning tools and skills of how to manage stress and anxiety and difficult situations in healthier ways. Because I think if we stop and we don't learn new tools, it's just a matter of time before we just turn back to that behavior, because it's so easy to do that.
Well, something that the steps most certainly helped me with was, you know, just going through the process of all of the steps was, one of the things was recognizing that I come from like a very enmeshed family dynamic, and, you know, recognizing how much of an impact that had on my well-being. Okay. And I think that's something that the steps really embody, is the movement towards a sense of well-being. Okay.
Yes.
But on that note, you know, back to the step 1 thing. So you can have a physiological dependence. Okay. But so an addict will always experience some degree of a physiological dependence or reaction, or you know, they refer to the allergic reaction that we have,
Yes.
right? Like when you have one, it's just you're going to keep going.
Sure.
Right?
Triggers.
Yeah. So but one can have a physiological dependence, but not necessarily be an addict. Okay.
Yes.
In the colloquial, does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Yes, very much so. Absolutely. So that's what I'm saying. There's a continuum before we get to addiction, and not everyone is using, even abusing is an addict. It's just, you know, it's addiction is, I'm not managing the way that I feel, and something outside of myself will make me feel better. And when substances are put down and people don't find recovery, this is what I've experienced. It's just simply no longer using or drinking, then other behaviors pop up. So I'm not doing that, but now I'm binge watching things, or I'm, you know, my food consumption, I'm controlling food, I'm using something else as a medicator. And that's why, you know, I speak of, let me just speak for myself, with the clients that I work with, I speak of addictive behaviors collectively, because it's no good for me to help, I don't know, let's just call this person Adam. And then Adam stops drinking, And within a few days, there's other addictive behaviors that we never talk about because I'm just talking about alcohol, and that's fantastic. Yet you're abstinent from alcohol, and that's brilliant, and that's a great achievement. But we're not talking about the fact that now he's obsessively watching porn or gambling. And, you know, my concern always is that it's not about substituting one addictive behavior for another, because it's still a self-destructive behavior. And to understand it as such, it actually, how I describe it, in one way, it's irrelevant what substance or what process addiction there is. It's about finding recovery and identification around that which is the fallout. So there's the shame and the guilt and the regret and the remorse and the impact on family. And I guess this is where we move to unmanageability, that in any given meeting, whether it be AA, NA, or, you know, whatever it might be, it's the damages and the consequences that everybody can align on. So that one could be, I was kicked out of home because of, and the one person can say, I was using cocaine, I was drinking alcohol, I gambled away all my our savings. What sits there is a dishonest interaction with loved ones. It's the shame of hiding a behavior. So for me, there's a common humanity. It's like an equalizer. And therefore, no addiction is better or worse from that perspective, because they're all at a base level. The identification is at an emotional space of the guilt, the shame, the regret, the remorse, the fear, the powerlessness, and what it's like to feel so out of control. You know, I sat with someone today desperate to stop drinking, and after setting an appointment with me yesterday on the phone, drove to the bottle store and bought 2 bottles of whiskey, and was like, what am I doing? And then went home and drank. You know, so there's this awareness of, I don't want to be doing this, but this inability to stop, and to be trapped in that space is a really terrifying place for somebody to be, whether it be a process addiction with food, with a loved one, in terms of codependence, it doesn't matter, but it's a terrifying place to find oneself.
Yeah. RJP.
What's happening, Ron? How you doing?
Pardon you, man. That was a good chat we had last night. I really enjoyed that, see?
Yeah, one time.
Had
me thinking the whole day.
Yeah. Chris, I'm going to bring you on, man. How are you doing, hey?
Good yourself, Ryan.
Yeah, okay, good.
So, if I can quickly jump in, I think there was a few questions I wanted to ask. Is it Toni?
Toni, like a boy.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So you basically answered it, because from my side, I think you have to be honest with yourself. And when it comes to addiction, my drug of choice was alcohol. So it definitely happens, like, for example, with painkillers. It would say take 2, and then you'll go and you'll take 4, because you know you're going to get some sort of feeling out of it. So I think you have to be very honest, and it's something that I've learned going through ARC. You have to be honest with yourself, because you can very quickly find yourself, you know, taking something else to numb that feeling, instead of
substituting.
Definitely, and then I just have one other question. So, for example, let's say a person had a drinking problem and used it as a coping mechanism, but managed to stop on their own with and then managing it, still being able to drink 1 or 2 drinks here and there. Is there still a risk, if that person didn't go for proper treatment, that they might, you know, lose control again of the substance as a coping mechanism?
Yeah. I'd love to hear from you what you think. I mean, as you ask that, does it feel high risk, or does it, you know, for a person to do that, or does it feel, as long as they're managing, then it's not?
What I've learned, I think the chance is still there, to be very honest. It just depends on the pressure and how you deal with things. Yes.
Okay. So it is risky.
Yeah.
In that respect, sure. You know, it's not for me to say, well, you know, if you identify, and whether it be you or another person, if you identify as an alcoholic, I really encourage abstinence, because it's very difficult to manage where there's loss of control. This time I may be able to have one. Next time I may be able to have one. But then the third time I find myself blacking out and finding myself in a terrible situation. And so in some ways it is gambling with that risk, because we can't guarantee that it's not going to happen. And so it's to understand that if there is addiction, if there isn't addiction and it's use and abuse, the person isn't at risk. But if there is addiction, for me, it is high risk behavior. And unfortunately, I would love to say something else, but unfortunately, it has the potential to lead back to further consequences and damages. And what we do know, we hear about celebrities dying, or people who have been in recovery for a long period of time and they go back to their substance. What I understand is that, somebody goes back to the quantities that they were using very quickly. However, the first time they were building up tolerance to it, and the second time around they don't, and their body hasn't got time to actually process it, and they maybe have a heart attack and die. And so the risk is high, and it's to understand, well, do I want to take that? Am I willing to take that chance? And what is it about, why am I needing to drink if the risk is so high? That if I was allergic to something, shellfish, I wouldn't be eating it to test out the risk. I would just stop eating it. What is it about alcohol that makes me want to drink it, to think, well, maybe it's not going to happen, so it's okay.
If I could add to that, JP, and then I want to bring you on for your insight on this. So if you think about why drinking becomes somebody with a problem, okay, all right. So it's only a problem when it's a problem, right? So you've got to think about what those problems are. Cool. So well, I'm drinking, and I'm constantly lying, like we spoke about last night, JP. I'm constantly lying to my wife so that I can get away with behavior that she has no she condones at no level, right? Okay, so I'm gonna be dishonest about it, and every time I say the words, if my wife's like, hey, I'm like last night, I'm gonna use that example, JP. So the wife jumps on the airplane and flies to Namibia, right? So every time she gets on the plane, flies to Namibia, there's the guy's opportunity. Okay, cool. I've got 4 hours on a plane. I got a gap. I'm gonna take it. Go and cause all sorts of mayhem. And then what happens? The wife finds out, and if, like we discussed last night, if the wife cares about the dude, she's going to give him a hard time about it. She's not just going to let him get away with that, because the behavior is not acceptable, right? It's like, hey, you neglected your children, you dropped them off at the neighbor's house, and you disappeared for 4 days. That's not what a responsible human being does, right? So he experiences then all of these consequences. Okay, cool. Goes into treatment or gives up the drinking, and then comes out and then decides to moderate. Okay, you've got to think about the how our brain sets up and our personalities sort of. It's like smoking cigarettes, right? I smoke, right? I'm trying to quit, but I have a smoke when I have a coffee. It's like it's almost like having a coffee triggers the
ritual of that. Yeah.
The ritual of it.
The association.
So I've developed these neural pathways and networks that have sort of and they're powerful. They're like very nested. And every time I have a coffee, I think it triggers this craving for a cigarette, right? The same applies with alcoholism, obviously. Like, yes, you can go through all of that turmoil, sort of be dishonest and on every occasion. But when you start trying to moderate, it's not like those networks just go away. Do you know what I mean? It's like they're still there. You know what I mean? So you're going to have that drink, and it's going to trigger, or the wife's going to get in the plane, it's going to trigger the thought, hey, let me get away with this. And then do you know what I mean? So I like what you said. Yes, you got to weigh up the risk. Okay, the risk is incredibly high. We have to acknowledge that. It's actually off the charts. I mean, you literally rewired your brain to interact and perceive and so on with the world in a certain way. And trying to getting back to and moderating. That's just not going to solve the problem. But JP, what do you think?
I just wanted to go. One of the biggest things that I jumped on a bit late here, so I don't really understand what. I was just on Facebook and I saw you had another live feed, and I was like, let me jump on and see what it's all about again. But one thing that was just picking at me the whole time was the fact that we speak about how an addict, being myself, a friend, or whatever, how many people around them they actually affect. And that's what stuck out for me throughout the whole day. I was just thinking about how many people we affect around us that's with our behavior. And that's what just, I don't know, today was just like just thinking about, coming back down to what I think, if I think about it, he probably affected just by this weekend, maybe 12, 13 people. And I think that's that for me, that's the crazy thing about, I'm cleaning whatever the case is for a very long time now. And but it's just like dealing with people in that. And that's like, Bobby said something, he's like, it came back to me, like I thought to myself, like, why? Like, I'm trying to help these people out, and will help my friend out, like yesterday, and it's hurting me. So
the topic is step one, JP, and I think that ties in so well, because what Bobby said is what in a sense is like you're powerless over people, right? So Toni, I think that really ties in well with your topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, JP, we haven't met, so it's great to meet you. Thank you for raising that concept. I mentioned earlier about the getting collateral, because the person that's using doesn't necessarily understand the extent of the damage of the behavior, and so it's really helpful for family members or loved ones, just people around, to be able to highlight, this behavior is affecting me in this way. It's making me feel this. And that's one of the consequences, and that's some of the fallout and the unmanageability is, what is the impact of my using, and again, I'm going to jump to whether it's alcohol or substance or process addiction. What is the impact of my behavior of choosing to lie to my wife, keep secrets, shattering trust? What is the impact of that on people around me, and taking ownership of that? Wow, when I do this behavior, this is the fallout. It's very difficult being on the receiving end, or JP, as you say, a friend, a caring person, and watching someone who is out of control, who is acting in a very self-destructive way, not necessarily being open to receiving help and care, and how powerless we feel. And that's another layer of powerlessness, that when I do work with my clients, we can go round and round in this concept that initially it is about substances, but then it starts to be, how are we powerless in our lives beyond just substances? And can I accept what that actually means? And if I can't, for example, codependency in terms of relationships, what is the fallout of that when I'm not able to accept powerlessness at that level? And then what is the impact on people in my life if I fixate on wanting everyone to be a particular way? What starts happening? And for me, it's that same preoccupation with the substance, preoccupation with the person, with the situation, which steals me away from relationships and being present in my current life. So we could even just substitute, the using addict. So the family member's addiction, and I see this often with my clients, their addiction is their loved one. They're obsessed with thinking about that, the intrusive thoughts. They can't focus on work. So the addict's sitting thinking about using tonight, and the family member sitting thinking about the addict. And so it's the same, and then there's the compulsive behavior of phoning and checking up and monitoring and whatever it is. So on so many levels, it's to understand the damages of, if I cannot accept powerlessness, I'm causing harm in my life to myself and those around me, even if it's not substance related. It's important to own powerlessness, and it's liberating to understand I'm powerless over other people. I can do what I can do, and there's a boundary there, and then I have to hand over and trust that I'm not responsible for the well-being of everyone else.
Yeah, because it's to the detriment. It's to the detriment of the actual people that are trying to help at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I would guess your loved ones and people who are watching you maybe becoming distraught by somebody else's behavior because they're not willing to take ownership of what they need to do. So there would be a layer of unmanageability that also would permeate out from that. And Ryan, that's why I said right in the beginning, that it is for me about addictive behaviors collectively, because when a substance stops, it often will become codependency that will kick up, food issues will kick up, other process addictions that weren't obvious before because they were hidden by the substance use because it was so extreme. Wow, like there's the elephant in the room. We finally name it. The elephant is addressed, and now suddenly we realize that there's many other smaller elephants that were never actually spoken about.
So Toni, the feeling that I was left, or the feeling that I was left with once I'd gone through that. So I mentioned earlier that so part of my introspective process initially when I first went into treatment was, JP, you might have done it when you were with us, the essays that revolved around powerlessness, right? So we had to do 5 essays on powerlessness and sort of and loss of control. Okay, so when I start, write 5 examples, 5 one-page examples of your experiences of when you start and you couldn't stop. Okay, and it took sort of ending up in hospital or whatever for you to end up. Okay, so going through that introspection and then sort of looking at the unmanageability that came as a result of all of that, right? And writing it out. That's so important. That's such an important process because it helps organize all of that. You know what I mean? Before it's kind of like just up here and it's just like shame, guilt, chaos. But when you write it out, it kind of like puts it all into a nice, neat sort of like perspective, right? So like this is what's going on. And the feeling I was left with when I sort of finished going through that process and I looked at all of this was I felt hopeless. Okay, I thought, step 1. acknowledging all of that. It's like, geez, I'm clearly hopeless. Okay. And I know step two for me, inspired a sense of hope. Okay. But the step 1, definitely a sense of hopelessness. So, and it wasn't just that I had all these ideas of kind of like, and ambitions and things that I wanted to achieve and all the rest of it. And the step 1 process kind of also like left me feeling hopeless around those things as well. So going through the step 2 process, identifying that I was I'm like technically an insane person, okay, because it's clearly only an insane person would behave in this way, right? Put my family at risk, put my marriage at risk, so on and so forth. So I'm an insane person. What is step 2? Step 2 came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Okay.
Yes.
So I'm jumping the gun, I know, but
okay.
Yeah. So step 1 left me with a feeling of hopelessness. I don't know. What do you guys say around that? I think that was like a important acknowledgement for me to make once I'd worked that, done that. Yeah. Chris,
do either of you want? Do you want to comment?
Yeah, I don't want to say something out of line now, but I also just want to pose a few questions, like in terms of, or for the people out there that's not sure if they've got a problem, because a lot of people manipulate the situation. You guys mentioned hiding it, lying about it, things like that. And then some people would say, if you start like at 8 o'clock in the morning, you definitely have a problem. Then you get other people that would like go on a binge and get out of control once a year, or only start later at night, saying that you've got a bigger problem than I have, for example, that starts early in the morning.
Sure.
How do you respond to a person if they ask you, do you think I've got a problem? Where do you draw the line? Because you can't just wait till shit hits the fan and your wife wants to leave you. Sometimes people are too scared to say, listen, I think you've got a problem. You're heading in the wrong direction. You're playing with fire. So at what stage should a person be worried and go for help before shit hits the fan? Sorry for my language.
No, it's perfect. I think, in response to, I'm going to respond to you, but then I want to come back to what you're saying, Ron, because I want to just reframe that for you in terms of the despair. For me, that's what I was saying before, that everybody's dynamic of what a rock bottom looks like is different. So there's no real way of calculating it. But people do have it. There's a stigma in the idea of, an addict is someone that's lying in the gutter. A lot of my clients, they're CEOs of companies, they're highly successful attorneys, advocates. I mean, if I think of who I'm actually working with, they're not the person that we imagine as an addict, what they would look like, or an alcoholic. And so part of it is shattering denial. And Chris, it's beautiful what you're naming, because we think, well, I'm not an alcoholic because I only binge, once a month, or, every now and then. It's not really an issue. And that's why, again, I speak to what other addictive behaviors are at play. Maybe it's alcohol once a month. What else are you doing? How else are you managing those behaviors? And if the person is just binging once a month on alcohol, maybe they're not an addict, and then it's a non-issue. So it's also not to say everybody who binges and then to be careful around just throwing around the word of being an alcoholic. But it's wonderful to, if anybody is curious and would like to be assessed, find a therapist that's an addiction specialist, go and have a conversation, or a facility who will do an assessment, talk about what's going on and get some clarity, because you're speaking of denial mechanisms where we minimize, we rationalize, we justify. Comparing is, this is not one of the best things. People will say, I always hung out with people using more substances with me, so I didn't feel bad and I wasn't the worst one. Or, geez, I was that guy that people didn't want to be friends with because I was always pushing it further. So it's different. But if there's any concern or curiosity for family members, loved ones, or the person using the substances or the behaviors themselves, going and having a conversation, having an assessment is just a wonderful beginning. And I often feel that if the question is there, it's there for a reason. We don't just have Joe Public. I've never had somebody rock up at my office wanting to be assessed and saying, well, I don't really use. What do you think? So if there's some form of emotional dis-ease around the behavior, then there's something there that needs to be addressed. And so to trust that, even if it's not addiction, there's maybe something that they need support with. So it might be that they're just using to cope with a trauma, and then that gets them into somebody's office to talk about the trauma. But if the question is there, I would really encourage that individual to seek some form of support. And Ryan, I want to go back to, what you were saying about feeling a sense of despair. And if I reframe that, I think, I can only imagine that you did a really thorough step one, that you shattered a lot of your denial around this isn't a big deal, it's not such a problem, to waking up to the reality of, oh my gosh, this is huge. The impact, the unmanageability, the fallout is way beyond what I ever imagined it was. And waking up maybe with a fright and a sense of, as you say, despair, or again, vulnerability. I'd use the word vulnerability to realize, wow, this is really what's going on. At the same time, without that insight, it would, finding long-term recovery isn't really possible. It just perpetuates and feeds denial. And so we need to break through that space. And I guess the despair, it's interesting when you say you had goals and ideas for your future and you felt despairing around, well, could I actually get there? With the sense of, well, this is how I've behaved, and not maybe having a frame of reference to say, if I change my behavior, then those dreams are actually possible now. If I continue with this behavior, they're not.
Well, so Toni, landing up in treatment for me was, I think I'd given my phone to a dealer, and I didn't have any way of communicating with anybody. And I had this laptop with a SIM card, and I managed to send my mom a message. And I sent her this message. I said, I just simply read, I need help. Okay.
Wow.
And this was after having gone through like a good 2 years of, okay, tonight I'm not going to drink or use. And or literally landing up in a hospital with a brain injury because of my using and drinking, and then swearing blind to myself and everyone around me that I'm never going to do it again, and getting out on the Monday morning and being drunk by the afternoon, right? Yeah. So that kind of thing was, it was inescapable to me. Like I think I'd done a step one of sorts, by the time I got to I need help, it was like,
you had already,
that's really what I'm referencing when I say that I felt hopeless. I think, I think really just grasping like, I can't do this anymore. I have no idea how to stop myself. I have no idea how to control it. There's so much drama and all sorts of shit that I'm causing because of all of this. And so for me, that was like just a real step one of sorts, right? But the introspective process of writing it all out,
of course,
that didn't really leave me feeling hopeless. That sort of, because I knew I was already on a path of like, you know,
take responsibility.
Exactly. So when I'm referencing my step one process, I'm really talking about the point that I got to where I sent that message. You know.
So the despair before, when you were trying to control it on your own and seeing the loss of control. And again, it took 2 years of attempting to control for you to realize, wow, this is actually, I'm out of control. I'm powerless. You were experiencing powerlessness consciously. You were noticing it.
And the act of sending that little message was like just an acknowledgement of all of that. It was like, okay, clearly I'm powerless and my life's unmanageable. I don't know how to fix it. I'm hopeless. I just don't know how. And my experience of rehab was, I was in a place when I was 17 in the Karoo Desert, and it was a horrible, nightmarish experience. And I was even prepared to put myself through that process in, as to try and sort of, because that was just, to stop and try and get back on track. We got a question here, a comment. Hi guys, I've tried on many occasions to moderate and it never worked out. I find myself using more and more frequently. It has to be complete abstinence. There is no such thing as moderation for myself.
It can be quite liberating to come to that realization. And when it comes to substances, I often feel that for people that are caught up in an addictive cycle around process addictions, it's a lot more tricky because they need to moderate. So for example, food or relationships, whereas substances, the abstinence approach just is simple. It's black or white, and therefore just don't touch it. It's just no. There's no like, how do I manage this and how do I go? It causes a lot of anxiety and disruption. And so, good for you for realizing. And sometimes people have to moderate for a long time before they realize this just isn't working. I'm moderating, then it's like, whoa, they're just losing control. And then I'm doing it again and again. So much effort and energy still put into focus, still being about alcohol or the substance. And so for me, that's not what recovery very much is about. Freedom from that and not having to be preoccupied with the substance. And so, if there is space for abstinence, I'm highly supportive of that for clients that, if people are willing to, and I often invite people to just experiment with abstinence so that they give themselves an opportunity for the first time, maybe in years, to be substance free by engaging in a program and going to meetings and working the steps and really investing time, effort, and energy into building a recovery, not just abstinence. And then to assess, what was that like? If it really didn't work, then let's look at another option. But bless you, generally at that point, people would understand, well, actually the gifts of recovery are immense and I don't want to go back to that life. But it's obviously not easy to get there.
Look, I think it's a painful process to go to end up in that. Sure. So guys, we our time's pretty much up.
Yes.
Chris, do you have anything to add or say or?
No, I think it's just true what Gavin said there. I'm not gonna gamble with it. I'm not gonna give it another go. I'm just gonna stay clean. It's not worth it. So I've also realized there's no happy medium for me. It's just, there's no gray area. I'm not gonna gamble with it. I'm not gonna take that chance. It's not worth it. So
JP,
if I can just say something to Chris, for one of the biggest things is think of it as a movie. You're stuck around for a long time. Is that play that movie to the end? Like before you pick up, put yourself into what is your role going to be in this movie and how that movie is actually going to end. And then know that when that movie ends and those credits come up, there's going to be consequences to that end of the movie. So, just biggest thing is consequences. Just know that with substance abuse, with whatever it may be, as Tony says, you got to try and weigh up the consequences. For me, that's what's kept me sober and clean for so many years. It's just thinking about the consequences. I'm powerless over a lot of things, but I just always think about what are the consequences. I got to, before that first thing happens, is like, what are the consequences of me doing this? And I mean, drugs and alcohol is one thing, gambling another thing, but there's so many things that, I mean, like literally, I mean, I'm thinking I'm 13 years now, something like that, but still today, it's, you know, that's what I do on a daily basis, is just, and try and explain that to other addicts, is, you know, just understand what the consequences are before you actually act.
Yeah.
Toni, do you wanna give us a closing thought?
Yeah, I just want to echo what JP's saying then. Good for you, Chris, for, you know, coming to that realization for your own experience, you know, just for today, and just to slow it down in that respect. JP, what you're saying, and what I want to encourage everybody to understand, whether you clean for one day or several years, or, you know, it doesn't really matter. The point is, stay connected to step one. Stay connected to powerlessness and unmanageability. It will create the reason for not using, the reason for abstaining from that behavior. And seek support. And, you know, for me, it's about the 12 steps. Go to meetings, get support. You're not alone.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, thanks everyone. So we actually didn't do the changeover to the MyRehab Cafe, so we're still on the public channel. Sorry about that. That was my fault. But I think it was good. I think we did a really good job of sort of, you know, going through step one. And thanks to you guys for participating, Chris and JP and Toni. Thank you.
Thank you.
So guys, with that, we'll end the broadcast and we'll see everybody soon. Thanks.
Good.
Good night.